The unbreakable bond. John Carter woke up to a strange sensation, like something was watching him. His body felt heavy, his head pounded, and a deep chill ran through his bones. He tried to move, but a sharp pain shot through his side. Then he saw her. Golden eyes, glowing in the dim light, stared down at him. A creature crouched beside him. Not human. Her ears were pointed, like a wolf's, standing tall and alert. Silver fur covered her arms, fading into smooth, dark skin. Sharp claws rested on her knees, and her long, bushy tail flicked behind her. John's heart pounded. His mind screamed. Alien. His breath caught as she leaned closer, sniffing him. He flinched, but his body refused to move fast. Every muscle felt weak, sluggish, like he had been drugged or something else. The alien girl's nose twitched, her sharp teeth flashing as she grinned. "You are awake, human," she said, her voice low and rough, like a growl. John tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. Where was he? How did he get here? And who? No, Wagate was she? He tried to remember. The last thing he recalled was wandering through the alien jungle, looking for shelter after his ship crashed. Then, an attack? A creature. Something big and fast had knocked him down. And then, nothing. Now he was here, and she was too close. "Whoa, where am I?" he croaked. The alien girl tilted her head. Safe. For now. Her eyes locked onto his, intense and unreadable. Then suddenly, her hand shot forward. Before he could react, she pressed her palm against his chest. A strange heat spread through him. Not warmth, something deeper, something that pulsed through his very bones. His vision blurred for a second, and his body shuddered. Then it stopped. The alien girl pulled back, watching him closely. What did you do?" John gasped. She smirked. "You are mine now." His stomach dropped. "What?" "I saved your life," she continued, stretching lazily. "You were dying. Weak. The bond was the only way." John's hands clenched into fists. "What bond?" Her tail flicked again, eyes flashing with amusement. "A Nexeri Alpha's bond." His breathing quickened. He didn't like the sound of that. "I don't know what that means," he said, trying to push himself up. His body refused to move. His muscles locked, as if held by invisible chains. Panic flared inside him. He struggled harder, but it was useless. The alien girl, this Nexeri Alpha, grinned wider, watching his efforts like a cat playing with a trapped mouse. "You don't understand yet," she said. "The bond ties us together. You live because of me. Your body knows this." John's mind reeled. He wanted to argue, to fight back, but deep down, he could feel it. Something inside him had changed. His senses felt sharper. He could hear the faint rustle of leaves outside, the distant growl of some unknown beast. The air smelled different, richer, carrying scents he had never noticed before. And worst of all, he could feel her. Not just physically. Somewhere in the back of his mind, there was a presence. Hers. A faint pull, a connection he didn't understand. "No," he whispered. "This isn't real." The Nexeri's ears twitched, and for a moment, she almost looked offended. Then she pounced. Before John could react, she was on top of him, her hands pinning his wrists. His heart slammed against his ribs. Her face was inches away, her sharp teeth bared in a teasing grin. "You don't get to say no, human," she purred. "The bond is done." John gritted his teeth. "I never agreed to this." She laughed. "You didn't have to." A low growl rumbled in her throat, and her grip tightened. John felt a strange pulse in his chest, as if his own body recognized her authority. No way. He wasn't going to accept this. With a surge of adrenaline, he twisted, trying to break free. His muscles burned, but he forced himself to move. He had to fight. He had to escape. But then, just as suddenly as she had pinned him, she let go. John rolled away, gasping for breath. He pushed himself up, his arms trembling. The nexeri sat back, watching him with amusement. "Good," she murmured. "You have fire. I like that." He glared at her. "I'm not your pet." Her grin turned sharp. "No," she agreed. "You are my mate." John froze. His mind went blank. His breath caught in his throat. What did she just say? Before he could even process it, the alien girl stood up and stretched, her tail curling behind her. "I will explain more later," she said. "For now, rest. Your body needs to adjust." John sat there, stunned, as she walked toward the cave entrance. His brain screamed at him to run, to get away from this insane alien who thought she owned him. But when he tried to stand, his legs gave out. His body didn't want to leave. And worst of all, deep inside, a small part of him felt like it belonged here. Cliffhanger. The bond was real. And there was no escape. Escape is not an option. John Carter woke up to the feeling of something breathing beside him. For a moment, he hoped it was just a dream. That maybe he was back on Earth, safe in his bed, and none of this was real. But when he opened his eyes, he saw her. The alien wolf girl, Kyra, as she had introduced herself, was sitting a few feet away, watching him with her golden eyes. Her sharp ears twitched at his every movement, her long furred tail curling around her legs. The memory of the night before hit him like a punch to the gut. She had bonded him, claimed him. Now his body refused to move against her will, and worst of all, he could feel her inside his mind, a strange presence lurking at the edge of his thoughts. John clenched his fists. No, he wasn't going to be someone's pet. He had to get out of here. The first attempt. His muscles were stiff as he forced himself to sit up. Kyra tilted her head, studying him like a predator waiting for its prey to make a move. "I need some air," John muttered. Kyra smirked but said nothing. Keeping his face neutral, John slowly got to his feet. His legs trembled, but he forced himself to stand tall. Every part of him screamed that something was wrong, that his body did not belong to him anymore. But he shoved the feeling down and turned toward the cave entrance. Step by step, he moved forward. Kyra didn't stop him. A flicker of hope sparked in his chest. Maybe she was bluffing. Maybe the bond wasn't as strong as she claimed. If he could just make it outside, he'd find a way to break it. His heart pounded as he reached the mouth of the cave. The dense alien jungle stretched out before him, thick with twisting trees and glowing plants. Strange sounds echoed in the distance. Deep growls, rustling leaves, clicking noises. John took a deep breath and his legs locked. A shockwave of pain ran through his body, forcing him to his knees. His vision blurred, and his breath came in sharp gasps. It felt like something inside him was burning, tightening, pulling him back. His mind screamed, "Mo v. Ronan. Escape." But his body refused. Behind him, he heard Kyra chuckle. Slowly, he turned his head and saw her leaning casually against the cave wall, watching his struggle with amusement. "You really thought you could run?" she asked, tilting her head. John's jaw clenched. "What the hell did you do to me?" Kyra approached, her footsteps slow and deliberate. "I told you," she said. "You are mine. The bond doesn't just connect our minds, it connects our bodies. You cannot leave me." John refused to accept that. He gritted his teeth and pushed harder, willing his legs to move. Agonizing pain exploded through his chest. It felt like his very soul was being ripped apart. His breathing turned ragged, and his vision went black for a second. Kyra grabbed his arm, her sharp claws pressing lightly into his skin. The moment she touched him, the pain stopped. John gasped for air, his body trembling. Her grip tightened. "The farther you go, the worse it gets. The bond will not allow you to leave me." John's anger flared. "This isn't fair." Kyra leaned closer, her golden eyes glowing. Life is not fair, human, but you will learn to live with it. The second attempt. John was stubborn. He wasn't going to accept this without a fight. The next day, when Kyra left the cave to hunt, he tried again. This time, he took slow, careful steps, testing the limits of the bond. He moved inch by inch, pushing his way toward freedom. At first, he felt nothing. Then the pressure started, like an invisible weight pressing against him. It was uncomfortable but bearable. 5 steps, 10 steps. His heart soared. Maybe he could do it. Maybe he cooled. Pain. A white-hot agony shot through his skull, and his vision split in two. Suddenly, he wasn't in the cave anymore. He was somewhere else. He could see through Kyra's eyes. She was running through the jungle, chasing something, her claws digging into the soft earth, her heartbeat pounding in his ears. John stumbled, gripping his head as the world blurred together. He could feel her hunger, her excitement, her instincts. He was inside her mind. No, no, no. He gritted his teeth, trying to push her out. Kyra, miles away, suddenly stopped running. Her ears twitched. Then, with a burst of raw force, she shoved him out of her mind. John collapsed, gasping for breath. His body was drenched in sweat. His heart slammed against his ribs. Then he heard the sound of footsteps. Hers. She had returned, and she did not look happy. The consequences. Kyra stormed into the cave, her fur bristling with irritation. "You tried again." John didn't answer. He couldn't. He was still trying to breathe. She crouched beside him, gripping his chin and forcing him to look at her. "You still don't understand," she murmured. Her voice was dangerously calm. "The bond is not a cage. It is a leash, and I am the one holding it." John jerked his head away, rage and frustration boiling inside him. "Then break it." Kyra's eyes narrowed. "I can't." The words hit him like a slap. He froze. "What?" She sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. "It's permanent. Once the bond is made, it cannot be undone. Not unless one of us dies." Silence filled the cave. John's mind raced. No way. There had to be another way. But Kyra's expression told him everything. She wasn't lying. His stomach twisted. His hands curled into fists. He was trapped. Forever. And there was nothing he could do about it. The Alpha's mark. John Carter sat in the dim light of the cave, staring at his hands. He had tried twice to escape. Twice, he had failed. The first time, his legs refused to move, and his body shut down. The second time, the pain nearly tore his mind apart, forcing him to see through Kyra's eyes. The worst part, he wasn't just trapped here, he was changing. His senses were sharper now. He could hear the distant growl of creatures outside, smell the damp earth of the cave, even feel the faint rhythm of Kyra's breathing from across the room. He had never been able to do that before. John clenched his fists. "This is wrong. This is not me." A part of him wanted to scream, to fight back, to tear the bond apart with his bare hands. But deep inside, he could feel it like a whisper in his mind, something foreign yet familiar. The bond wasn't just linking them. It was pulling him toward her, and that scared him more than anything. Kyra's warning. Kyra was sitting by the fire, sharpening a curved blade made of some alien bone. Her golden eyes flicked up, watching him in that way that made his skin crawl. "You're thinking too much, human." John's jaw tightened. "Don't call me that." Kyra smirked. "You are human. For now." Something about the way she said it made his stomach twist. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice cold. Kyra stopped sharpening her blade and looked at him seriously. "The bond is not just a connection. It's a transformation." John's heart pounded. "No." "Yes," Kyra said simply. "Your body is adjusting. That's why you feel different. The longer we are bonded, the more you will adapt." John shot to his feet. "I don't want to adapt. I don't want any of this." Kyra stood too, her presence dominant, unshaken. "You don't have a choice." His breath came fast. His fists trembled. No, no, no. He had lost everything. His ship, his crew, his home. And now he was losing himself. "I won't become like you," John growled. Kyra's ears flicked back. For the first time, her amusement faded, replaced with something darker. "You think being nexeri is a curse?" she asked, stepping closer. John stood his ground. "I think being forced into something against my will is a curse." Kyra was silent for a moment. Then she sighed. "You truly do not understand." Before he could ask what she meant, she moved. Fast. John barely had time to react before she grabbed his wrist, her claws pressing against his skin. His body tensed as heat spread through him. A strange, primal sensation that made his pulse race. His mind screamed at him to pull away, but his body stayed still. He wasn't frozen. He just couldn't. Kyra leaned in close, her voice low and firm. "You belong to me. This is the way of the nexeri. The bond is sacred. It cannot be undone." John glared at her. "Then break it." Kyra's eyes flashed, and for a moment, her grip tightened. "You don't know what you're asking," she said. John didn't care. He refused to be owned. The challenge. That night, Kyra disappeared into the jungle, leaving John alone in the cave. For the first time in days, he had a moment of silence. He stared at the flickering fire, his mind spinning with thoughts. There had to be a way to fight this. He wouldn't let himself be controlled. Then he heard something. Voices. Low, growling tones, not Kyra. John's body tensed. He turned toward the cave entrance, his instincts screaming danger. A shadow moved. Then another. 3 figures stepped inside. They were nexeri, but not Kyra. Larger, bulkier, their fur darker and their teeth sharp with amusement. One of them, a nexeri male with deep gray fur, tilted his head at John. "So, you're the human," he said, his voice full of mockery. "I expected something stronger." John's muscles locked, but this time it wasn't because of the bond. It was because he knew a predator when he saw one. The nexeri male stepped forward. "Kyra is an alpha without a pack. That makes her weak. And you are a mistake." John's fists clenched. "Who the hell are you?" The male bared his teeth in a grin. "Her challenger." Challenger. Before John could respond, Kyra's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Step away from him, Rakar." John turned. Kyra stood at the cave entrance, her posture rigid, dangerous. The nexeri male, Rakar, grinned. "Ah, the lone alpha returns." He gestured to John. "You should have left this one to die. He weakens you." John's blood boiled. Kyra's tail lashed behind her, her golden eyes glowing with pure fury. "You are not Packmaster yet, Rakar." Rakar's grin widened. "Then fight me, Kyra." John's stomach dropped. Fight. Then he saw it. Kyra wasn't just standing there. She was tensed, ready. She had been expecting this. This wasn't just some random attack. This was a challenge for dominance. And if Kyra lost, John's gut twisted. He turned to Rakar. "What happens if she loses?" Rakar laughed. "Then her claim over you is gone." John blinked. For the first time, he felt hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was his way out. If Kyra lost, he would be free. Then he felt something else. A sharp pull in his chest. His mind blurred, his breath caught, and suddenly he felt Kyra's anger. Her determination. The bond surged between them. And for the first time, John felt something terrifying. He didn't want her to lose. Even worse, he didn't know why. The pack war begins. A deep, rumbling growl filled the cave. John Carter felt it before he heard it. The sound reverberating through his chest, a primal warning that sent a chill down his spine. Kyra stood in front of him, her muscles tensed, golden eyes glowing in the dim light. Across from her, the nexeri male, Rakar, grinned, his sharp teeth glinting like knives. This wasn't a simple fight. This was a battle for dominance. John's pulse pounded. The rules were clear. If Kyra won, she kept her claim over him. If she lost, he was no longer hers. That meant he would be free. But something twisted in his gut. Something wrong. He didn't want Kyra to lose, and he didn't understand why. The challenge begins. Rakar stepped forward, his heavy frame moving like a predator stalking its prey. His dark fur bristled with anticipation. "You should have stayed hidden, Kyra," he sneered. "Alphas without a pack don't last long." Kyra bared her teeth, and weaklings who hide behind their packmates don't deserve to lead. The tension crackled like electricity. The other nexeri warriors, Rakar's followers, formed a loose circle, blocking the exit. John's stomach turned. This was a trap. This wasn't just a challenge. Rakar hadn't come here for Kyra alone. He had come for John too. And if Kyra lost, Rakar wouldn't just let him go. He would take him. The realization sent ice through John's veins. This wasn't about his freedom. This was about who owned him. Kyra's tail lashed behind her, her claws flexing. "Let's get this over with, Rakar." The big nexeri grinned. Gladly. Then, he pounced. The fight. The moment Rakar moved, Kyra exploded into action. She ducked under his first strike, her body moving like liquid as she slid past him and slashed at his side. Rakar snarled in pain, but he was fast, too fast. He spun, claws raking the air, and Kyra barely avoided a direct hit. The cave erupted with the sound of growls and snarls, claws clashing against stone and flesh. John watched, his hands trembling. Kyra was strong, but Rakar was bigger, stronger, and he wasn't fighting to test her. He was fighting to kill her. Kyra leaped onto the wall, pushing off with inhuman speed, but Rakar was ready. He caught her in midair, slamming her into the ground. John flinched as Kyra let out a sharp grunt of pain. She tried to roll away, but Rakar was already on her. His clawed hand wrapped around her throat, pinning her against the cold stone. "Yield," Rakar growled, his voice deep and triumphant. Kyra spat blood in his face. Rakar growled in irritation, pressing down harder. "You're finished, Kyra. Submit, and I'll be merciful." John's hands curled into fists. Every part of him screamed to stay out of it. This wasn't his fight. This was their way, their law. But watching Kyra struggle, watching her lose, it felt wrong. The bond between them pulsed, and suddenly, John felt something foreign rush through his veins. A surge of heat, of anger. And before he even realized what he was doing, he moved. John enters the fight. John didn't think. He acted. His body reacted on instinct. Something deep, something primal. 1 second, he was standing still. The next, he had lunged forward. His fist collided with Rakar's face. The impact sent a shockwave of pain through John's arm, but the big nexeri stumbled back. For a brief frozen moment, the cave fell silent. Then, chaos. The nexeri warriors roared, their golden eyes flashing in shock. John had broken their laws. Kyra, still coughing, turned to him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Rakar straightened, his snarl deeper than before. "You dare interfere?" John breathed hard, his entire body shaking. The bond was buzzing inside him, pushing him forward. He didn't know why he did it. He just knew one thing. He couldn't let Kyra die. Rakar's fury was instant. He roared and charged. John braced himself, expecting to be torn apart. But then, Kyra moved. She tackled Rakar mid-charge, knocking him back. She was faster now, stronger, and John felt it. He felt her rage, her pain, her determination. The bond was feeding them both. Kyra ripped into Rakar with newfound strength, her claws cutting deep. Rakar howled in pain, staggering. The fight had changed. It wasn't just Kyra versus Rakar anymore. It was Kara and John. Together. The end of the battle. Rakar stumbled back, bleeding, his breath ragged. He looked at Kyra, then at John. His eyes narrowed. "You share power," he muttered. His voice was no longer mocking. It was disbelieving. Kyra stood tall, her breathing heavy. Yes. The cave was silent. Then Rakar did something unexpected. He lowered his head. It wasn't submission. It wasn't defeat. It was acknowledgement. "The bond is different with him," Rakar said, staring at John. "You are not just an alpha, Kyra. You are something new." John felt his throat go dry. Kyra grinned. "I know." The transformation. John Carter sat at the edge of the cave, staring at his shaking hands. They didn't feel like his own anymore. Ever since he threw that punch at Rakar, ever since he felt Kyra's power flowing through him, something inside him had changed. He could still feel it, buzzing under his skin. His senses were sharper than before. The distant hum of the alien jungle was clearer, every rustling leaf, every shift of the wind. He could smell things he never noticed before. Kyra's scent, the iron tang of Rakar's blood still in the air, the damp stone beneath him. Even worse, his heartbeat no longer felt like his own. It was too steady, too controlled, like it was matching Kyra's. John clenched his fists, his breath coming fast. No, this isn't happening. But it was. And it was getting worse. Kyra's revelation. "You feel it, don't you?" Kyra's voice broke through the silence. John turned. She was leaning against the cave wall, arms crossed, watching him with that familiar, knowing smirk. But this time, there was something different in her eyes. Something almost gentle. "I don't know what you did to me," John muttered. "But I don't want it." Kyra's ears flicked, amusement dancing in her golden eyes. "You say that, yet your body tells a different story." John's jaw clenched. She was right. He could feel it. A part of him wanted this. And that terrified him. Kyra walked closer, her movements fluid, graceful, too graceful, like a hunter moving toward its prey. She crouched beside him, tilting her head. "Do you know why nexeri bond?" John glared at her. "To control." Kyra chuckled. "Not just that. There's something deeper." She reached out, pressing 2 fingers lightly to his chest. The moment she did, heat spread through him, running along his skin like static. "The bond doesn't just connect minds," she murmured. "It reshapes. It rewires. It makes 2 beings into something more." John swallowed hard. "Then why am I the only one changing?" Kyra's eyes darkened. "Because humans adapt." John felt his stomach drop. "What?" Kyra's voice was quiet, serious. "I knew it from the moment the bond took hold. You're different. No human has ever bonded with a nexeri before. Your body isn't rejecting it. It's evolving." John's breath hitched. He looked down at his hands again. His nails were longer than they should be. His veins felt hot. His muscles coiled like they were waiting for something. He squeezed his eyes shut. "You're lying." Kyra didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because deep down, John already knew the truth. He was changing. And he didn't know how to stop it. A dangerous hunger. The following night, John woke up to a sensation so foreign, so wrong, that he almost screamed. Hunger. But not the kind he was used to. His stomach wasn't just empty, it was aching, burning. Like he needed something specific. He sat up, panting, his throat dry. He turned toward Kara, who was already awake, sitting near the fire. She was watching him, like she had been expecting this. His mouth felt dry. His hands trembled. "What's happening to me?" he whispered. Kyra sighed. "Your body is craving what it needs." John ran a shaking hand through his hair. "I need food." Kyra's eyes softened. Not food, John. He froze. A cold weight settled in his stomach. Then, slowly, he understood. His eyes flicked toward the raw meat sitting near the fire. His heart pounded. No, he whispered. Kyra tilted her head. You can fight it. For now. John stumbled back, his breath ragged. This wasn't just about instincts. This was about survival. And his body was no longer human enough to ignore what it needed. The hidden truth. John spent the next few days fighting himself. Every time Kyra ate, he had to force himself not to stare at the raw meat in her hands. Every time he felt the pull of the bond, he had to remind himself that he was still human. But the worst part, he could hear things now. Thoughts that weren't his own. Flashes of emotions, scents, urges that came from Kyra. It was getting stronger, and it was getting harder to ignore. Finally, after 3 days of torment, John had had enough. He stormed toward Kyra, his voice shaking with frustration. There has to be a way to break this. Kyra didn't look surprised. She just looked tired. She sat back, stretching, then looked up at him. There is. John's breath caught. What? Kyra exhaled. A way to sever a bond. John's heart pounded. Tell me. Kyra's golden eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, there was no teasing, no arrogance. Just quiet, heavy truth. If I die, the bond dies with me. John's blood ran cold. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Then, no, he said. His voice was low, fierce. Kyra's ears flicked. You wanted a way out. John shook his head. Not like that. The words left his mouth before he even realized what they meant. But when he saw the way Kyra's expression softened, he knew. He knew he couldn't kill her. And he knew something even worse. He didn't want to. The betrayal and the final choice. John Carter stood at the edge of the cave, the night air thick with the scent of damp earth and distant rain. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. The words still echoed in his head. If I die, the bond dies with me. Kyra had spoken them so easily, like it didn't matter. Like her life was something he could decide. And that terrified him. Because part of him, a dark, unfamiliar part of him, didn't want the bond to end. Not because he was trapped. Not because of fear, but because he wasn't sure who he was without it anymore. And that was the worst realization of all. A dangerous offer. The jungle was alive with movement. The thick, twisted trees cast long shadows, the air humming with distant growls and rustling leaves. John had left the cave alone. He needed space. He needed to think. He needed to get away from Kyra, but he didn't get far. The second he reached the clearing, something moved in the darkness. John froze. His instincts screamed at him, danger. Then, a familiar voice broke the silence. You look troubled, human. John's pulse spiked. Stepping out from the trees was Rakar. His dark fur shimmered in the dim moonlight, his golden eyes sharp with amusement. Behind him, 3 nexeri warriors stood silently, their postures relaxed but ready. John tensed. I'm not looking for a fight. Rakar chuckled. Good. Neither am I. He took a step closer, his gaze assessing. You're different than before. Stronger. He inhaled deeply, his ears twitching. More like us. John's skin crawled. He didn't like the way Rakar was looking at him, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Rakar tilted his head. I assume Kyra told you. John frowned. Told me what? Rakar smirked. That you are losing yourself. That soon, you won't be human at all. John's breath caught. He hadn't said it out loud, but it was true. Rakar's smirk widened. You feel it, don't you? The hunger, the instincts, the power. His voice dropped lower. The bond is changing you, and Kyra, she won't stop it. John swallowed hard. Rakar's expression turned serious. But I can. John's heart skipped. What? Rakar crossed his arms. You want to be free? I can give that to you. John's jaw tightened. How? Rakar's voice was smooth, persuasive. Leave Kara. Come with me. The words hit like a punch. Rakar took a slow step forward. Kyra is an outcast, clinging to power she doesn't deserve. She's making you something you were never meant to be. John's hands curled into fists. And you're different. Rakar's eyes gleamed. I don't want to own you, human. I want to use you. John's blood ran cold. Rakar continued, his tone calm, logical. You think I don't see it. You fought like a nexeri. You felt the bond's strength. You and Kira, together, you are something new. He tilted his head. That makes you a threat. John's stomach twisted. Rakar's voice hardened. So I will make you an offer. You walk away. Come with me. Join my pack. He paused, then added, or I will kill her, and the bond will break anyway. John's breath came fast. He had two choices. Walk away and let Kyra die. Stay and lose himself forever. He opened his mouth, and a sharp voice cut through the night. Kyra's fury. Step away from him, Rakar. John turned just in time to see Kyra emerge from the jungle, her golden eyes burning with rage. She wasn't alone. Behind her, two nexeri females, scared, fierce-looking, stood at attention. John blinked. Kyra had backup. Rakar clicked his tongue. So predictable. Kyra ignored him, her gaze locking onto John. Tell me he didn't tempt you. John's throat went dry. Because she could feel it. Through the bond. She knew. Rakar chuckled. He was listening. His eyes gleamed. That means he was considering it. Kyra's lips pulled back in a snarl. You don't understand the bond, Rakar. Rakar's smirk didn't falter. No, you don't. He looked at John. The human isn't yours, Kyra. He never was. John's stomach clenched. Kyra's glare snapped to him. Tell me, were you going to leave? The moment stretched, heavy, and suffocating. John looked at her. For the first time, he truly saw her. She wasn't just an alien claiming dominance. She was alone, fighting for survival. And she had chosen him. His mind screamed at him to run. But his heart, his instincts, told him something else. John straightened. Then, slowly, he turned to Rakar and said the words that sealed his fate. I choose her. Rakar's smirk vanished. Kyra inhaled sharply, her tail flicking. Rakar's voice dropped into a growl. Then you die with her. The final battle begins. Without warning, Rakar attacked. He moved like a shadow, lunging with terrifying speed. Kyra leaped forward, colliding with him mid-air, their claws ripping through flesh. John stumbled back. The bond surged, his vision blurring. For the first time, he didn't just feel Kyra's emotions. He felt her pain. Every claw mark, every impact, every breath. John fell to his knees, gasping. Then something snapped inside him. A raw, primal power burst through his veins. Kyra screamed. Not in pain, in mourning. John looked up. And for the first time, his eyes weren't human anymore. The true bond. The night was alive with the sound of battle. John Carter felt everything. Every slash, every impact, every moment Kyra was hurt. He felt it as if it was his own body. His breath came in ragged gasps as he struggled to stay upright. His vision blurred. Flashes of Kyra's perspective flooded his mind. Her anger, her pain, her will to win. She was fighting for him, and something deep inside him answered. The bond had been pulling at him for days, reshaping him, twisting his instincts, making him something more than human. He had tried to fight it, tried to hold on to who he was, but now he needed it. Because if he didn't embrace it, Kyra would die. And that was not an option. Kyra versus Rakar. The battle rages. Kyra twisted midair, barely avoiding Rakar's crushing blow. The massive nexeri warrior slammed into the ground where she had stood just seconds before, sending a shockwave of dust and rock into the air. Rakar was bleeding. Deep slashes marked his chest and arms, but Kyra wasn't unscathed either. A long gash ran down her side, dark blood dripping onto the earth. She was fast, faster than him. But Rakar was strong, too strong, and he was angry. "You should have submitted, Kyra," Rakar snarled, flexing his claws. "You cannot win." Kyra wiped blood from her mouth, her eyes burning. "Neither can you." Rakar's ears flicked. He glanced at John, still kneeling on the ground, shaking, changing. Then he grinned. Kyra's heart stopped. Rakar *** lunged. *** not at her, but at John. "No." Kyra roared, pushing off the ground with everything she had. Too late. Rakar was already on him. His claws slashed toward John's throat, ready to end this fight with a single brutal strike. And then, John moved. John's final transformation. It wasn't a choice. It was instinct. The moment Rakar came within striking distance, something inside John snapped. The bond surge. No, exploded. John saw everything. Not just Kyra's emotions. Not just her pain. Her power. Her instincts. Her rage. And then, they became his. John's body reacted before his mind could catch up. His hands weren't hands anymore. His nails weren't nails anymore. They were claws. Rakar's killing blow came fast. John's counterattack came faster. His newly formed claws slashed upward, meeting Rakar's strike with a force that sent both of them flying apart. John hit the ground hard, but he didn't feel pain. His breathing was wild, too fast, too strong. His vision adjusted instantly to the darkness, catching every tiny movement. The sounds of the jungle were clearer than ever. And when he lifted his hands, no, not hands, clawed, nexeri hands, his stomach twisted. Kyra landed beside him, her chest heaving, but she wasn't looking at Rakar. She was looking at John. John, who was not fully human anymore. Her golden eyes widened. "John," she whispered. John looked at her, then at himself, then at Rakar, who was staring with pure shock. "I told you," Rakar muttered. "You're not human anymore." John's breathing steadied. He lifted his head, locking eyes with Rakar, and he bared his teeth. It wasn't a smile. It was a challenge. John versus Rakar. The final battle. Rakar hesitated for only a second. Then, with a furious roar, he charged. John didn't think. He moved, faster than before, faster than he ever thought possible. The jungle floor blurred beneath his feet as he met Rakar's attack head-on. Claws clashed against claws. Fangs snapped inches from throats. John was fighting with more than just human instinct now. The bond had completed. He knew how to dodge, how to counter, how to strike in a way that wasn't human, but wasn't fully nexeri either. He was something else. And for the first time, Rakar was losing. A vicious left hook sent Rakar stumbling. John didn't let him recover. He slammed into him, tackling the larger nexeri to the ground. His claws pinned Rakar's throat. For the first time, Rakar's confidence cracked. "You," he choked. "What are you?" John breathed hard. His claws trembled, not with fear, but with restraint. "I don't know," he admitted. And then, in a move that shattered every nexeri law, he let Rakar go. Rakar gasped for breath, coughing as he pushed himself up. Kyra stood beside John, still tense, ready to end this. But John just stared at Rakar, chest rising and falling. "You lost," John said. His voice was calm, unshaken. Rakar met his gaze. Slowly, his ears twitched. Then he lowered his head. Not in submission. In acknowledgement. "I see now," Rakar muttered. "You are not just bonded." His eyes flicked between John and Kara. "You are something new, something we do not yet understand." He exhaled, standing fully. Then he turned away. John frowned. "That's it." Rakar's voice was low. "I came here to prove Kyra was weak." His gaze flicked back. "She is not. And neither are you." John felt something shift. Rakar was walking away. The fight was over. Kyra looked at John, still wary, still tense. "Are you all right?" John exhaled slowly. He looked down at his hands, his clawed, alien hands. Then at Kyra. At her. The bond was still there, stronger than ever. And for the first time, it didn't feel like a leash. It felt like a choice. He met her gaze, and for the first time, truly accepted it. "I think," John said, "I finally understand." Kyra blinked. "Understand what?" John's lips curled in a smirk. "We belong to each other." Kyra's tail flicked, a slow, knowing grin spreading across her face. "Finally," she murmured. "You get it." She turned, walking toward the jungle. "Come on, human. We have a pact to build." John hesitated. Then, with one last glance at his old self, the human self he had fought so hard to keep, he took a step forward. And he didn't stop. Final line. John Carter was no longer just human. Kyra was no longer just nexeri. Together, they were something new. And the galaxy would never be the same.